Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good evening and also good morning to all. So I'm Danish, your MC for today. So before we begin our sharing session, let's us recite doa by let's have a doa recitation by our brother Ahmad Dai.
Al-Fatiha. A'udzubillahi Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi washabbihi ajmain. Allahumma antas salam wa minkas salam wa ilaika ya'udus salam. Fahayyina rabbana bis salam. Ya salam salimna ajmain wa ja'alna min ibadikas salihin. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, praise be to Allah, Lord of the world. That your blessing and your peace be on your servant and your messenger Muhammad and on his family and his companions. Allahumma ya Allah, on this glorious day, in conjunction with our talk, we uphold our hands to pray gratefully to thank on your infinite favor to us, till we can live in peace and harmony, perform our tasks as your servants. O Allah, we ask your blessing to make this occasion in success. Allahumma ya hayyu ya qayyum ya dzal jalali wal ikram. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad al-Fatih lima ughliq wal khatim lima sabaq. Nasril haqqi bil haqq wal hadi ila siratim mustaqim wa ala alihi wa sahbihi haqqa qadrihi wa miqdarihi al-azim. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adzabannar. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa baraka wa sallam. Walhamdulillahirabbil alamin.
Alright, thank you, Brother Dai, for that doa. So before we begin, I would like to give a short brief on Dr. Aisyah. So Dr. Aisyah is a lecturer at University Putra Malaysia. Okay, so Dr. Aisyah, the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, my name is Aisyah Bakar, and I will share with you a little knowledge of mine on intangible cultural heritage, historic city of Malacca. It is 8 p.m. in Malaysia, hours away from the weekend, and I hope that my colorful presentation can help wake you up because we can't wait to have our holiday now. All right, so intangible cultural heritage in historical city of Malacca. I'm just gonna throw you a bunch of maps here just to show you where exactly is Malacca. So Malacca is in the peninsula of Malaysia. If you can, this is a map of Malaysia. This is peninsula Malaysia, and you can see the circle here, and the circle up there is the Georgetown, and this is the Malacca city. This is the Straits of Malacca, and these straits are very important because this is where the merchants come in. Okay, so this is where Malacca denominated area is located at Malacca Tengah. Okay, and this is denominated area. You have the core zone and the buffer zones of Malacca, and then this is an aerial view of the core zones of the inscribed area. This is a Google map of the nominated area. So this is where we are going to explore. All right. So before we begin, just to understand how exactly Malacca was nominated, so it was July 7, 2008 when Malacca was inscribed in the World Heritage List. So Malacca is a hotspot for Malay, Chinese, and Indian, European, and sundry influences. The historical city of Malacca experienced a succession of colorful past from the Malay Sultanate, from the Chinese, from the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, and the post-colonial period. The maritime tradition in the early years were the catalyst for multiculturalism. So before it all began, Malacca was simply a fishing village. But due to its strategic location between China and India, Malacca came to monopolize the trading routes or in the quadrants of the globe. So in the early 14th century, Malacca forged alliance with the Ming Emperor to secure protection against the Siamese invaders. So over time, the Chinese settlers who married the local Malays resulted in the Baba and Nyonya community. In the 15th century, about that time, the South Indian traders arriving from the Coromandel coast, which is the southeastern coastal region of the India, also intermarried with the local Malays and the Chinese women and established the Chetty Malacca community. So they all of them survived the Malacca Sultanate and the centuries of Portuguese, Dutch, and British rule. So Malacca was used as settlements by the three European powers for 500 years. So you have the Portuguese occupying for 130 years, you have the Dutch for 145 years, and finally you have the British for 171 years. So that's what happened to Malacca, and that's how we have this multiculturalism elements inside Malacca. So if you go into Malacca, you walk everywhere is walking distance. In Malacca, you can you can experience different places in one area, just walking distance. So Malacca was inscribed 2008. I mentioned that before. So in the how Malacca was inscribed, yeah. So the operational guidelines of the implementation of the World Heritage Convention came out with 10 criterion for you to inscribe a place, a location, or a culture into the World Heritage List. So Malacca fulfilled criteria 2, criteria 3, and criteria 4. So the first criteria, which I personally feel that this criteria is quite hard to fulfill, Malacca has to exhibit an important interchange of human values over a span of time within a cultural area of the world on development, architecture or technology, monumental arts, town planning or landscape design. You see the three dimensions that you have to, the keywords here, interchange of human values over a span of time within one cultural area. That's criteria 1. Criteria 2, Malacca has to bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization which is living or which has disappeared. So the keyword here, testimony and evidence, you have to show that these cultural civilization or tradition which could be still living or they could have disappeared. Criteria 4, Malacca should be an outstanding examples of a type of building, architectural or technological ensemble or landscape which illustrates significant stages in human history. The keywords here, building, architecture, technological ensemble, landscape, which illustrate stages of human history. We have just talked about those stages, and that's how Malacca fulfilled these criteria. I'm going to show you justification of each of these criteria, but we are moving from 4, 3, 2 because 2 is the hardest one, all right? Okay, so for criteria 4, where Malacca has to be an outstanding example of building, architecture or technological ensemble or landscape in different stages of human history, this is the justifications. Malacca reflect the coming together of cultural elements from elsewhere in the Malay archipelago and from China, from India, with those of Europe to create unique architecture, townscape without parallel anywhere in the East and Southeast Asia. In particular, arrange an exceptional architecture of shop houses and townhouses. So you have different places in Malacca showing these different stages of human history. You have the Baba and Nyonya, you have the Porta de Santiago when the Portuguese come in, and then you have the Malay house from the Sultanate, and then you have the Dutch square from when the Dutch was occupying Malacca. And then criteria 3, to bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization which is living or which has disappeared. The justification here is that Malacca is a living testimony to the multicultural heritage and tradition of Asia. Keywords, multicultural heritage, where the greatest religions and cultures met, the coexistence of distinct faiths, coexistent, both tangible and intangible, in particular the different religious buildings, which are the testaments to the religious pluralism of Asia. So within one city, you have different you have temples, you have church, you have mosque, you have Cheng Hun Teng Temple, you have Christ Church, you have Sri Poyadamurti Temple, and the Kampong Kling Mosque. Now, if you look at the Sri Poyadamurti Temple, can you see Kampong Kling Mosque just a few chop houses away from the temple? And fun fact, the name of the street is Harmony Street. So all of these religious buildings are very close together, and people live in harmony. Criteria 2. Okay, exhibit an example interchange. Exhibit an important interchange of human values over a span of time or within a cultural area of the world on developments in architecture or technology, monumental arts, town planning, or landscape design. So the justification here is that Malacca represent exceptional examples of multicultural trading towns in East and Southeast Asia, forged from mercantile and civilization exchanges of Malay, Chinese, Indian, and European cultures. So we have four different cultures within Malaysia, four different local community or cultural community, I would call them. So you can find the cultural community of Babak Nyonya from Injongka Street. You can find the Chiti community from Kampong Chiti. You can find the Malay community from the Kampong Watan, and the Portuguese community from the Kampong Portuguese. So these cultural community are the testimony of the multiculturalism in Malacca. All right. So before we try to understand before we understand what is intangible cultural heritage and why we want to safeguard cultural heritage, we have to understand what is culture itself. So can we just go back to when Malacca, during the Sultanate era of Malacca, and then the invaders coming in, and then all the merchants coming in, and everyone marry everyone. So we are now confused of what exactly the culture that we would like to safeguard, because everything is just amalgamation of different culture come together. Okay, so first we have to understand what is culture and how exactly culture works. Culture is a wide range of transmitted and learned practices and human behavioral patterns. So these are very, very broad explanation of culture, and we have to understand there are different layers of culture. The first layer, which is you call it cultural tradition layer. This is where the community of shared languages, traditions, and belief come together. So they present the life values and rules that set them apart from other communities. So the characters of these communities are formulated by the collective attributes and qualities of individuals within the communities. So they have values, interpretations, and orientations of local culture. You call them the local culture. The first layer of culture is the local culture of the cultural tradition. And then the second layer, when these different cultural tradition, this specific community of cultural tradition, they assimilate with different groups of other cultural traditions in the community in a particular location. For example, in Malaysia, we have different people from different ethnicities, different culture background. They come together and assimilate. So they share identification through geographical proximities, such as national identity, etc. And finally, the third layer, which is universal culture, which is the global mainstream of society. This is the assimilation of different societies from the subculture at the national level into the global mainstream of society. This assimilation process forms the universal culture that are recognized and differentiated by universal traits. What are the universal traits? They are the biological and physiological traits such as age, gender, location, all right? So this influences the behaviors in issues such as commitment at work, shared attitudes, and preferred activities. So we are if you are familiar with Generation Z, Generation Y, now we have Generation Alpha. So these are the universal culture. So people from different generation, they share universal preference, universal traits. All right. Oops. Okay, so now we arrive at intangible cultural heritage. So what is intangible cultural heritage? How does it work? And why do we want to preserve this heritage? Intangible cultural heritage is referred to the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith. So the communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize the culture as their heritage. So how does ICH work? Intangible cultural heritage is transmitted from generation to generation. The keyword here, transmitted from generation to generation. And secondly, cultural heritage ICH is constantly recreated in response to the environment, interaction with nature, and the history. So it is not something that's identical from one group to another group or from one generation to a generation. It is constantly recreated, it is constantly modified in response to environment and interaction with nature and the history. So why we want to preserve intangible cultural heritage? Because it provides sense of identity and continuity. And therefore, it promotes respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. You can find this in the UNESCO document 2003. These are among the intangible cultural heritages. Okay. All right. Now let's understand the properties, characteristics, and domains of ICH, Intangible Cultural Heritage. I'll refer to it as ICH. Okay, the important properties of ICH is the manifestation of the culture itself. How do people perform them? You have people performing and safeguarding them and manifest them, practice them. Okay, so the first property is the manifestation of the culture. The second property is the societal condition. We have to make sure that there is a viable environment for the culture to be manifested, and therefore we have to focus on the societal condition of the community that is practicing them. And thirdly, which is debatable, that it is the intergenerational transmission system. So you have from one generation to the next generation transmitting the culture. Like for example, our mother or our father tell us about a certain culture or our oral traditions or our languages. So they pass on the culture from one generation to another generation. Okay, why I say this is debatable is because you see culture itself, it's not just because of time. It doesn't just occur across time, it also occurs across space. When people move from one places to another places, they bring their culture to that places. So intergenerational transmission system is not just a matter of from one generation to another generation, but it also has to do with people from different places. Okay, what are the characteristics of intangible cultural heritage? There are four cultural characteristics. The first is traditional and contemporary, which means that the culture has to be acquired or inherited from the ancestors. And this culture are usually constantly modified from one generation to another generation, which means that the culture cannot be identical. It's impossible for this culture to be identical because we are passing it on from one places to another places, which people there have assimilated to the other subcultures. So it is impossible for the culture to be identical. Okay, expressive and representatives. Okay, this culture has to be borrowed and shared. Okay, this culture has, borrowed and shared means that from different locality, people from different locality. So when they manifest this culture, they basically borrow the culture from the actual area, from the original area, and share the culture to everyone around. So at the same time, they have to also pay respect to the original locality of this culture, and they have to also feel a part of a larger society, not to feel exclusive from the larger society, but also to feel a part of the larger society. Okay, the third characteristic, inclusive and continuous. Okay, these are ICH is documented by human embodiments. Okay, these are not documented just merely from written documents, but it is by human embodiments. Human have to constantly practice this culture. And how do we witness? What are the testimonies of the cultures? Okay, we have to look at the humans who are practicing them. We have to look at the transmission or the imitations of culture from one community to another community or from one generation to another generation. The fourth characteristic, human-born and community-based. So human-born means that the culture is reliant on transmission. This culture needs to be transmitted. If not, then it will be lost. Okay, so it is resilient and ongoing. That means that this intangible cultural heritage, they outlive the practitioners. Okay, when the practitioner died, this culture is still in the community. It is being transmitted to another generation or another people. So this is what it means by how the culture is outliving the practitioners. They have to be resilient and ongoing, and there is no fixed location for a certain culture to be practiced. Okay, there are 5 domains of intangible cultural heritage. We have the oral tradition and expression, the performing arts, the social practices and festive events, the knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and finally the traditional craftsmanship. Okay. Okay, these are among the cultures expressed within the domains of ICH. Oral traditions include languages which are very important because if we do not learn the language of which a certain culture is transmitted, the culture itself could be interpreted. So so the languages have to be safeguarded. For example, the traditional Malay, the Kristang language of the Kampung Portuguese, okay, the Chatty languages, and the Chinese as well. So if these languages are properly transmitted, and you wouldn't have lost in translation, okay, of culture. Okay, and you are also performing arts such as the silat and all the dances. Okay, social practices and festive events. And these are the knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, such as how do you cook, what are the ingredients of your cooking, okay, the religion, and finally the traditional craftsmanship. So these are the different domains of intangible cultural heritage. Okay, actually, I cannot believe that I just presented them within 20 minutes. Okay, so actually that is the end of the slide. I would like to focus on you. I want you to ask me questions so that I want to know what you want to know before we continue. So is there any question that you would like me to that you would like to ask?
We have one from Dr. Majdi. Yes.
All right, I'll start. Good morning, all. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Aisyah, for your presentation. My question is in relation to universal heritage or universal culture, as you mentioned. Is there what threats do you observe when looking at Malacca nowadays in 21st century when it comes to universal culture? What threats is heritage facing or heritage buildings are facing in relation to globalization, for example? Globalization, we live in a global village, we all consume similar but different products. We have technology that makes us all connected and interconnected, but at the same time, there are downsides of this phenomenon. Have you approached that subject in your research, and could you tell us more in relation to Malacca? Thank you. Terima kasih.
Okay, I'm going to share you a presentation of my master finding. I went to Malacca and did my research during my master studies, and I studied how the assimilation of the local culture into the universal traits, and see how different people section into different universal traits practice the different cultural heritage. Okay, John. Okay, I think I'm just gonna I'm trying to share this presentation, but this one is not coming out. Hold on, yeah. Mm. Okay. Okay, this is 2013 presentation where I studied what are the assimilation and what happened when the cultural tradition assimilates into the global culture, into the universal mainstream. Okay, so okay, these are the universal traits which I looked into. which are the gender, ethnicity, origin, age classification, marital status, religion, geographical location, education classification, income classification, and occupation. So from this different section of community of different genders, different ethnicity, origins, age classifications, I look at how they prioritize different culture. Okay, hold on. Okay, so from gender itself, I saw that the women are actually practicing more of those culture, especially on language and oral traditions compared to men. So in terms of nurturing and transmission, the women actually are working more than the men. Okay, and in terms of origin, you also have sense of place attachment. If the practitioners originate from the place, you have a sense of you have this sense of place attachment, and you would practice the culture more. In terms of marital status, apparently people who are married, they have a strong familial institution, and they would practice the culture more. They would transmit to their next generation, their offsprings more. And then age class, traditional versus contemporary, which is the debatable part, where people from the younger age, they are not interested in the old, mostly craftsmanship actually, mostly craftsmanship. So they don't want to be a part of those things anymore. But other things such as performing arts, the youth are actually more active in those things. But the older generation, they would practice more of a oral tradition and other things associated to practices in relation to nature, in relation to religion. Okay, in terms of education class, local context versus global context. You see, when we study at home, we are brought up by our parents. Okay, and then when we go to school, we merge into a different culture, and then as we go further, and further, we assimilate with people from different societies for education. Sometimes we kind of merge too much into global context. We no longer practice the original culture. Okay, in terms of income class, the different economic inequality. For instance, people who are, I don't know how to say this in a simplest way. Okay, for example, those who are in the B40 Malaysia, they would practice more culture instead of those in the T20. Okay. In terms of occupation, it depends on the convenience and interest of different occupation. If the occupation is somewhat associated with the culture, then um, they would practice more. In terms of ethnicity, it goes back to the languages and history. So, where did the ethnicity rooted from? So they learn and they transmit the culture based on the different ethnicity. In terms of religion, it is based on the metaphysical force of those religion that actually is somewhat make the practitioners practice the culture, manifest the culture quite naturally. And finally, geographical location, it's a sense of culture belonging. This is the same as sense of place attachment. So if they feel that they belong to that geographical location, then they would practice the culture more. So this is the different section of people when categorized in different universal traits. They have different preferences or different intensity of ICH manifestation and practices. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, this is an amazing research I'm looking at, and I'm curious to read more about it through your papers or any published material. Uh, I was referring. The other side of the question is, how do you see globalization transforming the cultural heritage in the city of Malacca? Is it a threat, or or are there any positives, or is there a positive side to it? So globalization, what it entails, sameness. People are cultural traditions are disappearance. We fall in that sameness phenomena. Buildings are becoming more of similar facades, similar typologies, similar bay windows, etc. So is that something you looked at or reflected on in your research?
Okay, good question. Let's go back to the properties of ICH. Okay, let's go back to here. Properties, characteristics, and domains of ICH. You see, people do talk about globalization a lot when it comes to culture, and people blame, well, sort of blame globalization for the disappearance of culture. I don't think globalization is to blame because it is a process, and we have been adapting to the process. We have been going through this process for a long, long time. And without globalization, I probably are not here communicating with you. So globalization is not something that we should blame on. It's actually an opportunity. You see globalization as a problem. I see it as a solution because this is an opportunity for us to share our culture, to make other people aware of our culture. This is our opportunity to do so. Because again, when UNESCO characterize intangible cultural heritage, it is not because if you belong to if you cannot assimilate, that means you don't belong. It's actually it has to be inclusive and continuous. It has to be not only the idea of transmitting, and there's no such thing as authentic when it comes to intangible cultural heritage. It is borrowed and shared from one community to another community across the globe. So it's not globalization does not make a culture disappear. It's the assimilation of people into the universal traits culture. People want to feel belong to the larger society, and they probably try to fit in when we try to fit into the larger culture, and that's how we kind of neglect our local or rooted culture. For example, me myself, I don't know. Me myself, my language, my first language is Malay. So that is my local culture. That is my cultural tradition. So I still practice Malay among my friends, among my family. But with you, I cannot speak Malay now, right? But I cannot speak Malay. I have to speak English. I have to fit in, and I have to merge with you. But without speaking to you in English, then you wouldn't know that I'm from Malay community. I can speak Malay. I can sing in Malay. So it is actually an opportunity for us to share our culture. It is not something that we should see as a problem or prevention towards cultural sharing. Does that answer your question?
Great. Yes, it does. I mean, debate is long, but we'll continue it some other day in a publication, probably.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Okay. I think Asma Gabi
Yes,
is.
we have Dr. Asma. Dr. Asma?
Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Aisyah, for your new clarifications about the tangible and intangible cultural heritage. I will continue with the question of Dr. Majdi, and I think that there is two points of view to think about the consideration of the globalization as an opportunity or as a problem. So if you take the cultural and the social angle or the social side, it's clear that we consider that globalization is a way to enrich exchanges and to create new and limited opportunities. But if we take the side of the technical way, the technical side, and especially the tangible heritage, we'll find that globalization is threatening ancient sites and is threatening cultural sites. It is threatening and is fragilizing historical sites. So I would ask you maybe how would, in reference with the example of Malacca, how would we treat or think about the historical site to promote and to preserve and to ensure its protection from from globalization threatening and fragilizing?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I cannot catch that.
My question is in reference to the example of the city of Malacca.
Okay.
So the city of Malacca, it's a good example of preserving the cultural side and the tangible and the intangible sides of the city. However, there are nowadays cities, for example, in all countries and here in Tunisia that are becoming fragilized from this fact of globalization. For example, the extension of urbanization, the new constructions, the new styles of constructions, the new text of laws, etc. So, in reference with the example of Malacca, would we find any special applications to protect and to preserve and to promote, to develop more and more the cultural image and the historical heritage of the city?
Okay, the answer is actually my lecture. I was talking to you about intangible cultural heritage and how Malacca is inscribed into the UNESCO World Heritage List, right? So this is one of the approach how Malacca is trying to safeguard the culture, not just the tangible ones, the tangible buildings, but also the intangible cultural heritage that actually are making the tangible buildings animated. You can go to the different communities who are working very, very hard to preserve their culture, showing their festivities, transmitting their oral traditions, doing performing arts. Let me show you. Performing arts and safeguarding craftsmanship, which is actually quite declining right now, and also the social and religious practices. This is one of the best ways to protect our culture, to list them in the World Heritage List. When you are listed in the World Heritage List, you have to fulfill a lot of many criteria. You go into the documents and you have to fulfill these criteria. You have to show that you have put some efforts, a lot of efforts to actually protect these buildings, to protect this intangible culture. So I think that's the answer to it. You have to make sure, you have to list them in the UNESCO World Heritage. If you feel that those culture are significant, if you feel that those culture worth protecting, and okay, I wish I can show you all the criteria, but yeah, because of these different criteria, look back into your culture, look back at yourself, and look at the criteria in the World UNESCO operational guidelines for the implementation of World Heritage Convention. Look back at these criteria and see if they actually match the location of your heritage area. So if you feel that these your areas are worth preserving, protecting, and you still have the testimony of the culture being implemented, that tangible or intangible, then list them in the World Heritage List. You should be able to document those culture, and hopefully with this documentation, you have the money coming in, you have the authority working on it, and hopefully it can be preserved. These cultures can be preserved. Is that answering?
Okay, thank you. As Majdi said, the debate is long, but yes, this is the starting. Inscribing sites on the UNESCO list is the starting.
That is a start. But again, if you have to understand that intangible, why is it that UNESCO highlights on the characters of intangible cultural heritage? It's this part. Okay, the characteristic of ICH, because we understand, they do understand because of modernization, urbanization, so these cultures become fragile, right? But we have to understand that modernization, globalization, urbanization, these are processes, and architecture is actually a solution. It's not something that we just do out of beauty. You know, it's supposed to be a solution to human problems. Um, so that's why when UNESCO characterize cultural heritage, this intangible cultural heritage, they talk a lot about inclusive and continuous. It is continual. This culture has to be continual from one place to another place. So even if you're not even if you're not in Malacca, even if I'm not in the Malay community of Kampung Morton, I can still practice the Malay culture where I am now. I'm in Selangor. Okay, and then it also has to be inclusive. When I am promoting my culture, it doesn't mean that I exclude myself from the global society. I am showing to them, wait a minute, I have my own culture. Do you have your own? Okay, let's share our culture and what can we learn from each other? We are learning from each other. And apa? And the culture itself is traditional and contemporary because you have to because they do acknowledge urbanization, they do acknowledge modernization, globalization, all these things, industrialization, because these culture are constantly modified. But as long as you practice them, then it's that it is a testimony that the culture used to exist, the culture used to be there, a testimony of the history. Okay, so these are a testimony of the identity itself. But then again, you have to remember that ICH, if you read through the documentation, intangible cultural heritage do not use the word authenticity, because there's no such thing as authenticity in culture. You cannot be as authentic as the original culture. Even the original itself is very, a lot of people practicing it in different ways because they have to adapt with the environment. They have to adapt with things changing around them, the history and whatnot, the nature, right? So as long as the culture is being passed down, the culture is also transmitted by different places. The culture is there is a sense of belonging in the culture. Then it is a culture worth preserving. Mhm. Any more question?
All right. I think Nora, yeah, Nora, you can go first before I have my questions.
Yeah, good morning and thank you for the presentation. It was really helpful. I have a question. I have one question. So, as we all know, the architecture has always stood as representation of society throughout history by reflecting the values, daily life, and traditions, of course, beliefs. So, I would like to know more about the daily life, maybe, of inhabitants in Malacca. If there is some specific behaviors or traditions that really affected the architecture there, or that were translated throughout the architecture. Like I read that they use timber as a main material of construction because they believe that it has something related to possessing the spirits or something like that. I would like to know if there is any other if there is any other examples like that that was translated through architecture in Malacca.
You mean intangible cultural heritage translated into the tangible? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I'm going to give you example of traditional craftsmanship. Okay, because this traditional craftsmanship, you have to know that you have to have the skills. Okay, now this traditional craftsmanship is fragile right now because it's declining. People are not practicing it. People are relying on computer and robots to do things now. So it's very hard for us to preserve these skills across the practitioners from one generation to another generation. All right, this is an example of traditional craftsmanship. Can you see the motifs? This is Baba and Nyonya. I'm sorry if the picture is very small there. Okay, this is a Baba and Nyonya museum. Can you see these motifs? So these are among the motifs inside the building, the shop houses. You can go to Malacca because why Malacca is so special is because it is an amalgamation of culture. I cannot highlight to you one specific culture because there's so many. There's so many culture coming from different places, and they have been uh, they are mixed. They are adapting from one culture to another. For example, this is one example. Okay, and then you also have Kampung Kling Mosque. Kampung Kling Mosque is a mixture of Chinese, of Dutch, of Malay. Okay, so there's so many things, motifs. For example, the tiles comes from the China. Okay, and then you have the pagoda. You also have the Malay culture inside. So all these, the plasters, I think from the Portuguese. I can't remember, but different cultures are actually imprint their motives, this craftsmanship into the building itself, the tangible building itself. So that's among the one of the many examples of how intangible cultural heritage is enacted or manifested in the tangible cultural heritage. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, okay. I think it's my turn now. All right, okay. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Aisyah, for the interesting presentation today. It is a delightful day to have my close friend and Dr. Hazza's close friend also here, Dr. Aisyah. And it is like quite strange to have our friends over here to give the talk to our students who are not. But it's a very amazing presentation and sharing. I have a question regarding your characteristic of the ICH just now. I think the previous slide. The fourth characteristic, talking about the human born and community based. So this intrigued me with a question because it revolves among the reliance on transmission resilient and ongoing and no fixed location to preserve this kind of ICH, this characteristic. So since the pandemic has taken its toll on us, okay, especially during this time, and the manifestation of the digitalization of heritage has come into the place. Okay, so how do you think that this manifestation of the digital heritage can actually help to preserve and conserve the community-based ICH? For example, I know, like for example, if you can see through some Facebook from Museum Warisan Malacca, from Persatuan Warisan Melaka and whatnot, they have the initiative to have the digital heritage of the architectural, the tangible heritage. Like for example, having the virtual tour through the museum, through some monuments like Ifamosa and whatnot. But I think the digital heritage manifestation for ICH, it's quite limited. Do you think that the manifestation of this digital heritage is relevant for human-born and community-based heritage?
Okay, when
In
it
that
comes
sense.
to okay.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. I'm not sure if this is considered as digitalization as well, but I would say, I think during pandemic, I watched a lot of movies. I watched a lot of TV shows, because we're home, right? What else can we do? So by I think you can in a way digitalize those culture through these platforms like movies or videos, and you can watch them. Have you seen, I'm actually right now watching this TV shows called called Down to Earth with Zac Efron. So Zac Efron actually went to different places and trying to understand how people from different places manifest their culture. So he went to many places, to the Iceland, to the Manila. So for what I understand is that how he does it in a way, it shows how a problem is actually a solution. So different problems that different local culture go through, which is quite similar. So he shows how different culture use that problem as a solution. For example, he went to one of the places. I cannot remember the name of that place. it shows how the kids are they don't go to conventional schools. So they go to school, but they don't actually learn the things that we learn in school, like our mathematics. The syllabus is not the same. It's completely up to how the kids want to learn. So the kids are inside this building. They give all the equipments. The kids can just learn on their own, and the equipments are based on the surrounding, where they get these equipments. So these are based on their surroundings. So they look at the problems in their surrounding and using the equipment to solve the issues in the community. And this is shown in the Zac Efron TV shows. It's sort of a documentary, but I think that's one of the ways that we can appreciate other culture. We can, like Zac Efron said, down to earth. Right. So you can, I think one of the best ways to show culture manifestation, and to make sure that they are not lost is actually to document them in movies, in shows. It actually helps us to feel that identity. Okay. These people to feel, or to feel encouraged to preserve identity, because they know that those things matter. Those things matter for the global world to see them. Okay, so I think one of the best way for ICH manifestation to be digitalized is through TV shows or movies.
All right, okay, thank you very much. I think we have Dr. Haza.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Dr. Aisyah, for the beautiful and very interactive slide presentation. So I think we get very visually attracted to your slide. Thank you for that. I just want to emphasize further more on what Dr. Aisyah already mentioned. It is the importance of knowing the basic. What Dr. Aisyah explained is how do we understand culture. And this knowledge is not only to understand only Malacca, because we have other culture in different region of Malaysia or different country. By having an understanding on how we could define a culture, which part that we need to see. For example, when Dr. Aisyah doing this research, we went to Malacca together as a team. Before I went to Malacca probably from a tourist perspective. But when we have knowledge on what culture is all about and how to see the characteristic and what are the domain, we go again to the place with a different perspective, with the knowledge that we have. Then only we realize the importance of protecting oral tradition. For example, the Chiti language, the Portuguese language. Before we see it from a layman perspective, from a tourist perspective, we see it sometimes as something cultural values or whatnot. But when we really understand heritage, and I do hope our students from Malaysia and also Tunisian can understand further that this is the basic that we need to know when we wanted to understand community or culture. We see it, for example, how to protect the culture. We have issues, we have threat or whatnot. What are the characteristics that we need to look at? I think this slide presentation on characteristic of ICH, domain of ICH, this is the consistent info that Dr. Shakir last week mentioned and in our previous class also mentioned. So I hope that with this knowledge, when you go to a heritage site later on, not only Malacca but different site as well, you can try to see from a heritage perspective how can this culture being seen and how it could well be projected further because of the opportunity or whatnot. So I do hope that with this knowledge, we can try to see culture in a beautiful perspective. It's not only going to heritage site and see the heritage as a tourist perspective, because they are beyond than that. Heritage values is beyond than that. So I hope that this basic understanding that Dr. Aisyah shared with us can be jotted down as a benefit or added values for our Malaysian student as well as from our Tunisian student as well. So thank you, Dr. Aisyah, for your lovely presentation today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Do we have any question from our Tunisian student as well? Those probably who are doing on Malacca or other. Yes, we have a Tunisian.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha, for this great, very great presentation. I just want to have a little clarification about today this is the inhabitants still used or this cultural in their life, everyday life. I mean, we have tangible and intangible heritage such as dishes, clothes, especially clothes, and song, dance, etc. This heritage, did they conserve them just for conservation? I mean, in festivals, in exhibition, or they still use this tradition and they still in their everyday life? Because here in Tunisia, for example, we talk about heritage. We talk a lot about heritage, but we don't see, for example, traditional heritage only, for example, on ceremonies. But in the lifestyle of every day, we can't see a tradition. That's my question, and thank you a lot.
Okay. It goes back to what Dr. Hazar just said just now. It's culture. You have to understand how culture works. Um, I think it's because when we talk about culture, when we think about culture, we keep saying culture heritage has to be practiced, and I think it's the question of authenticity, whether or not it is the same from back then. For example, it is actually practiced in everyday life. For example, I say Malay, right? I Okay, simple thing like cooking. Okay, we cook Malay cuisines. We cook Malay foods, right? So those are among intangible heritage. These are learned heritage. These are transmitted heritage. Okay, it might not be as how do you say like the traditional, using all these traditional things now, because we have so much of equipment now, right? We are depending on the machine a lot, right? So we have the oven, we have the microwave, right? So it's probably not the same as how people back then practice their culture, but we still do manifest them every day. It just that it's probably a little different because we have modified them to fit into the current area. Okay, in terms of whether or not this cultural community still exists or still living, yes, they are still there. You can find them in 4 different areas. Okay, in Donker Street, in Kampung Watan, Kampung Portuguese, and Kampung Chiti. Kampung means village. Okay, so Jonker Street, the Chiti village, the Morton village, and the Portuguese village. You still have these people how they are here for Jonker Street Baba Nyonya is because they married the local Malays. And Chiti is also because the Indian married the local Malays and married the local Chinese. So they have the Chiti community. Kampung Motan is the traditional Malays trying to safeguard the Malay culture, all these different design of traditional houses are still there. And you have the Kampung Portuguese, who are also amalgamation of different cultures put together, but they are still trying to preserve a few things from the festivities and oral traditions such as Kristang, performing arts. So these people are still here. And again, I talk about culture, how it is not a fixed location. So you have to understand that people cannot stay in one place, okay? So even if these, you have people practicing them, and you also have outsiders actually practicing them when we do some kind of World Heritage convention, we do all World Heritage anything inside of Malacca. We have all these performing arts or these festivities that we share with the people from outside. We share with the tourists. So you don't have to have the actual community doing them. You can live with the community to see how they do their everyday life, but when it comes to shared ceremony, we do have them in Malacca once a year. And you can see all the different communities practicing their different cultures. So we do have to answer that, we have living communities. I would call them cultural communities of the Chiti village, Kampung Morton village, the Baba Nyonya, Jonker streets, and lastly the Portuguese village, right? And at the same time, you have to remember that people cannot stay in one place. People have proof, and they also will practice it somewhere else. And other people, the performers, which might not source from the actual cultural community, can actually practice those culture and show them to the world. So we are still trying to make all of this alive. Okay, we're trying to promote them still. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question. Does that help?
You perfectly answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any more?
All right, any more question from the Malaysian student?
Yeah, I don't see any Malay student asking question.
All right, can we have one or two?
Maybe because the Malay student has already been to Malacca. So
All right, okay. Afiq or anyone, can you ask any question which is relatable to your heritage? I know that you are doing on Tunisia, okay, but what Dr. Aisyah has presented and shared with us today, it is not basically only for Malacca. It is basically for everywhere. I mean, for all the UNESCO World Heritage site, all the gazetted sites. So since you are doing on the Tunisian Medinas, okay, they are all UNESCO World Heritage sites that can be also embedded with what Dr. Aisyah have shared with us just now. So any question that you can ask? Okay, Afiq, thank you very much.
Okay, I just cross-relate with what happened in Kairouan. I have a question about, because in Kairouan there is like a forgotten culture, like the traditional craftsmanship of copper. They did some products on copper, like they did some pottery or some kind of pot for utensils for cooking. But nowadays those culture are forgotten because of maybe the price of the raw materials are getting increased. There are no demands on that. So are there any
sorry, Afiq, I cannot hear you.
Okay, please. Okay, all right.
hello, hello? Okay. Okay, I'll repeat my question. So this is what happened in Kairouan. There is the traditional craftsmanship of copper. They did some utensils. They did some, buat some pot for cooking or something using copper. But nowadays, those culture are being forgotten. Maybe due to some lack of demand. Maybe due to the price of what you call that, the raw materials are getting higher. So what are some initiatives that can be done maybe to preserve those cultures? Because I think when I discover this, I think that it is interesting, but when I ask the Tunisian team, they think that it doesn't really, you know, because some cultures like carpet in Kairouan is working very well. They are getting demands from tourists, from others, but those corpus is very unique, but it's getting forgotten. So what is the initiative that can be done to preserve this? That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Afiq. How much time do we have left?
We still have time. I mean,
All
until
right.
4:30, right?
Okay, so okay, because of this also happens in Malacca. Yeah? It's not just in Taiwan or and craftsmanship is very hard to preserve because of uh, globalization. I don't want to blame globalization. It's just a process, but you see, people are now moving fast. People want things to be efficient, so people can get cheaper things, and when we can get cheaper things, we forget about the those very unique things which are very rare. These are very, how do you say this, hard to get, hard to access to all these things. Okay, so how do we preserve this culture is that we have to understand how it works, like craftsmanship itself. Okay, um, if you look at the domains of ICH, it started with oral tradition and expression. Okay, oral traditions are very, very important. The language is very important. Something that I say in Malay can be misinterpreted if I say in English. Okay, it could be, it wouldn't be the same, right? So when it comes to craftsmanship, it has to it's knowledge of not just the skills itself, but the practices, the social practices. How do you perform them? And when you want to teach someone of those skills, you have to have the oral tradition going on. You have to have the right language to teach these people. So it is not the idea of how do you preserve craftsmanship. It's actually to preserve the whole buffer of those culture, buffer of that particular culture. So it is not something easy to do. So I think we should start with the basic first, the basic things. If we were to preserve a craftsmanship, if we were to preserve the skills of the craftsmanship, what do we need to know about the whole viability of that craftsmanship? Is it because is it lost in translation, or is it because there are no longer people? People don't feel that the craftsmanship is no longer important because we can just access better things. Okay, so we have to understand what are the issues and what makes a culture possible to be safeguarded, right? Okay, so in terms of craftsmanship, it is actually a problem because one of the, I'm showing you, okay. Okay, these are the declining cultural activities and products in Malacca. Okay, so if you look at here, the highest one is language forms. Okay, and then it goes down to all these things, which also include knowledge and craftsmanship. Okay, these are very because of languages and not just the, like for example, I'm speaking Malay language, but this is Malay in the 2021. You know, the language Malay back then is probably different, and people don't understand different like proverbs or sayings in Malay. I mean, I don't even understand everything, all of those proverbs or sayings, right? So the language is very important to for us to work on, to understand. Okay, these I think it should, everything should start from language. If we can understand better the language of the cultural identity, the rest will just fall into place. We would understand why certain people speak a certain way, why a certain knowledge is transmitted a certain way. We need to understand, it has to start with the language itself. Okay, and then secondly, uh, it's because yeah, like you said before, demand, the cultural demand. If it is protected, for example, inscribed in a World Heritage list, there will be funding for those things to be preserved. So if you have the right funding, you have the right social condition, this culture can be preserved. The viability of those culture, the social condition will determine the viability of those culture, and the funding will determine the demand of those culture. If you have the demand, it probably you don't have to buy the crafts, but actually for tourism activities. These are among the ways that you can preserve craftsmanship. Does that help? Okay, Shazwan.
Hello, Assalamualaikum. Okay, okay. Based on the explanation you just give just now, my question is there any ways of, as we as a youngster that we live in this current era, to practice the culture, to remain the culture tradition in 2031? Is
Is
it
there
clear?
any way?
To we
So,
as a youngster to practice the culture tradition?
okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you look at yourself right now, Shazwan, okay, let's interact, okay? What do you do in your daily life? How do you spend your free time?
Playing with my gadget.
Play with your gadgets. What do you play? What do you play, Shazwan?
Um, uh, Instagram, whatnot.
Instagram, cool. Do you play games?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so why don't we just put the culture in the games?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I just joined TikTok, not because I want to play TikTok. I joined TikTok and see all this youth, uh, you know, promoting themselves, you know, to be what influencers and whatnot. You know, they can actually promote culture, don't they? Yeah, they can talk in Malay, and actually they gain more followers if they talk in Malay because they focus on the Malay people, and they focus on the issues of the Malay people. You know, people feel belong to. You know, people feel linked to these youths, right? So youths are actually quite active should be active in promoting our culture. If we can use our free time, if we can use our free time and make culture fun, I think that's the best way for us to preserve culture.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi. I just want to respond to Shazwan's question just now. I think the most important thing is that we have to have the awareness in ourselves to practice our culture. Like, for example, we here in Malaysia, we have a lot of dialects. And me, myself, I'm from Negeri Sembilan, but I live in Tanjung Malim, Perak. However, I do speak in Negeri Sembilan's dialect at home because my parents have been practiced that to us, to our siblings since we are little, so that we don't forget or we know on something about our tradition. So the important thing is that I think it is up to us to practice and to have the awareness in ourselves.
Yes, very good. It all started with the human born part. It all started with us. If we feel that those cultures are important, we will naturally do them. We will naturally manifest them. And culture is not something that you can, get. It is something that is manifested in everyday life, 24/7. It is basically you. You are the culture. Okay, so if you feel that the culture is important, it will naturally just happen. Any more questions? Thank you for the questions, everyone, especially those from UIA, the Malay students. I assume that you have been to Malacca. Oh, Dr. Kalilah nak tanya. Dr. Kalilah wants to ask question.
Yes, I do, Dr. Aisyah. Thank you for sharing. I just wanted to share my response. I think based on Dr. Majdi's and Dr. Asma's question tadi kan in the earlier session, because maybe it has been addressed because I missed out on a bit just now. I had to log out and log back in. But anyways, I think with regards to the challenges of sustaining culture, intangible heritage, and tangible heritage for our cities, like as we know, Malacca and Penang has been inscribed as a UNESCO site, and then the same goes to all the 3 sites in Tunisia. I think what the challenge comes after that is how do we maintain or sustain the sites as a cultural heritage site. I think if we look into the cases of Malaysia, the cities in Malaysia, planning, development, guideline, development control plays a big role in approving or deciding what sorts of development can be built, and then if that is in line with the heritage site, even whether that would disrupt the existing skyline and so forth. But I think in reality, if we look into our cities today, it is easier said than done, because you still see heritage sites being very much I think feeling the pressure from the external development. You can see at the core it may be able to maintain, but then you see massive development on the perimeters or the edges. And then although maybe like the sites are able to maintain the integrity of the buildings, the spaces, but then you might also have infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, like roads, streets, and then your utilities, your water systems. So I think over time, we can see that even between the local authorities, the architects, landscape architects, planners, and developers, they do face this struggle, because we still see projects that maybe we feel that it should not have been built that high, it should not have been built there, still being built. And I think this is the reality of how development is in most cities nowadays. Because although local authorities try their best to, approve or disapprove certain development and to have that as a control, but there are instances where things still happen and being built. And I think we know that, of course, if you have a tighter policy, tighter control, you might be able to do this then. But it's not all the time. It's like that. So I think going back to what Dr. Aisyah have said, and most of you have addressed, the awareness part on the architects, landscape architects, planners, and designers still have to come hand in hand. Because although certain development needs to be done, then the second question is, in what form should it be done and can it be done? And I think that is the role of us as the one who may have the ball in our hands to decide on what the design could be. Then we need to educate our client or our developer, because the struggle or challenges could happen at any stages of the development, although the site has already been inscribed. But what goes on in the next 5 or 10 years, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Aisyah, like for even Malacca and Penang, there will be, like in several years, it will be reviewed, right? The status of UNESCO for...
Yes,
Right.
that's true. They have to keep updating the documents and show what efforts they have done to still be inscribed in the World Heritage List. If they
Right.
fail to do so, then
Yeah, so I think that is the same for the cities in Tunisia as well. Kan? I mean, the same for all UNESCO heritage sites. So, which means that we still have to prepare. If we want the site to still be inscribed, then how do we make our development, future development plan, development control go hand in hand with this one? Because I think it's we cannot deny like urbanization and globalization. We cannot simply stop that. So we just have to find a way for it to continue, the old and the new, to grow together. But again, easier said than done, and it involves a lot of decision makings and a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people who needs to understand the importance of having that heritage, although we have very modern facilities and so forth. Yeah, so just wanted to share that thought to everyone.
thank you, Dr. Kaila. Very true.
Thank you, Dr. Khalila. This is very well resumed. This is well summarized. the issue or the opportunity of developing historical cities and preserving them from fragilization and from the globalization phenomenon that needs collaboration, and it is an open collaborations on several stakeholders, citizens, decisions, governmental decisions, etc. Thank you.
All right. Is my voice echo? Wait.
Yes.
Hello, hello.
There is an echo.
Oh wait. Okay. I think it's better now. So sorry for the technical issues, and much thank you to Dr. Aisyah for that wonderful presentation about Malacca, and I think that both side really understands about how to implement the tangible and intangible in our design and also in future designs. So thank you again, and before we go, can we have a photo session for our last input lecture? So I think and I need everyone to open their respective cameras so that we can see your beautiful faces.
When our MC said that they will reflect the understanding in design, we look forward to see that in their fourth year. We really look forward individually on how you will reflect the understanding in the design. We can see several faces. How about the rest? Can you help to switch on your cameras? Dr. Jasa is already switched on his. When you said beautiful and handsome faces, he switched on his camera very fast. So we wait for others as well, a few seconds. All right, you can compose your face. Which angle you feel acceptable. All right, in a count of 3, ladies and gentlemen. 1, 2, 3. I will snap another one. All right, just in case. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aisyah.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
See you.
and all. We
Thank
see you
you.
again.
See you again. Have a
Thank
good day,
Thank you
everyone.
all. Thank you
Yes,
very
thank
much.
you all.